Hey, it's a privilege today to have with me two of my good friends. Let me introduce to you, first of all, Paul Alexander. Paul, his day job, he's executive pastor at Sun Valley Church out in the Phoenix area, great multi-site church. And the other reason Paul is part of this conversation, though, is he's also one of our top ministry consultants with the Unstuck group. So, Paul, it's good to have you with us today.
Glad to be with you, Tony.
Yeah, and another good friend of mine here in there. Jim, are you actually in Phoenix today? I guess you're not.
Yeah, my rare days.
Okay, all right. So Jim Tomberlin is with us as well. Jim, I consider him to be one of the key voices on multi-site in the church today. In fact, he was one of the first. I mean, he was on the front end of multi-site strategy, having spent a number of years in ministry as a senior pastor, and then ultimately helping Willow Creek launched their multi-site strategy years ago. So, Jim, good to have you with us as well.
It's always great to be with you, Tony, here from the city of we got a little game going on this weekend called the Super Bowl. So I'm leaving town. I'm going to be in Seattle this weekend. So that's an interesting place to be for the Super Bowl.
Jim, I heard that they are going to have you make sure all the footballs are inflated appropriately.
Watching them carefully, closely.
Yeah. Jim is also now over MultiSite Solutions, an organization that he helped found and now is leading, providing consultation to churches that are engaging in multi-site across the country. And that's the topic for today's conversation. I wanted to talk about multi-site. And Paul, I'm going to begin with you. And we're going to come back to this toward the end of our conversation, but you're going to be launching a coaching network related just to multi-site strategy. But I want you to go back from your experience and help me understand kind of the key core issues that a church might need to process as they're considering, are we going to take the step into multi-site or not?
Sure. Yeah, going back from having a single site to going through a merger, that merger story is actually captured in one of Jim's books called Better Together, and parachute dropping into a community that's 45 minutes south of our original campus, our broadcast campus, and now opening up campus number 4. There are all kinds of surprises you find along the way. Fortunately, we had Jim's help early on in the early stages. He helped point us in the right direction, but issues of who's going to be the campus pastor, how are we going to fund this? What are the proper things we need to be thinking about ahead of time to just make sure we have a successful launch? What are the structures that we're going to have to shift in our thinking, and what systems got us to where we're at on one campus, and what systems are we going to replicate, and what are we going to have to change with our staffing models? I mean, Tony, it's a pretty long grocery list it made us think completely different about church. And we had to really shift our paradigm in what we were doing for the gospel to take ground at the pace that I think Jesus wants it to take ground at.
Yeah, and Jim, I know you've been engaged. Well, when was it that you were helping Willow launch their first sites, Jim?
Well, I went to Willow in the year 2000, and I was there for 5 years. And over those 5 years, we launched and oversaw 4 additional campuses.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and since then you've helped hundreds of churches across the country take that step as well. And I think early on, there were lots of us just kind of watching from the outside. Is this going to take hold? Is this going to be effective ministry? And it's gone from like a test drive maybe for many churches to right now, it'd be tough to call it a fad anymore, right? Because
I think Leadership Network several years ago said that this is no longer a trend. It's the new normal for healthy, growing, outreach-oriented churches. And any church over 1,000 today, and many even below 1,000, but any church over 1,000 today is either already multi-siting, they're planning on multi-siting, or they're thinking about it. So that's keeping me and our team very, very busy these days.
Yeah.
I'm in my 11th year now of helping churches figure out multi-site strategies.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Jim, Paul shared the stat with me. Maybe he was lying. I don't know. Or maybe you just made this one up, Jim. I don't know. But he indicated that only 15% of churches that go multi-site ever get past their first 3 locations. Is he making that?
Well, first of all, that is accurate. And it has come from our surveys. Our last survey with Leadership Network, which I work real closely with in creating these surveys and evaluating them. But that last survey a year ago said that to us. In fact, the last couple of surveys we've done over the last several years have reaffirmed that very few get beyond 3 campuses.
What are some of the core issues that are driving that, Jim?
Well, it is the reason primarily for that is because even though we have over 5,000 multi-site churches across the country and growing, most of those most of them are succeeding in a multi-site approach, but they're still acting like a mono-site church with 1 or 2 sites.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can get away with that with 1 or 2 sites by just not changing your internal structure and just adding more workload to the current team that's already serving the one original big site usually, and they can handle maybe 1 or 2 additional ones on the side. It's that third multi-site campus or their 4th total campus that often is the game changer, where the team says, hey, we can't keep doing church the way we're doing it now and support these out there unless something changes. And bingo, that's it. Something has to change. And it's that going from a mono-site to a multi-site mindset, which very few are willing to make that change, but those who do tend to when they get to the 4th campus, they'll tend to do more than that. And I think we will see more do this, but it will always be the minority that will break out of that mindset. Now, I like to say birthing campus is the fun, exciting part of multi-siting. I like to say that, making babies is the fun part, but it's the managing those inter-campus relationships that occur after you've launched, and the restructuring that you have to be willing to do if you're going to support a growing multi-site model. And that's why most churches that in the multi-site world are stuck at 1 or 2 campuses, 1 or 2 additional campuses.
That's great. Paul, you've shared with me a couple of different models of how churches approach multi-site. In fact, you mentioned at Sun Valley, a couple of them just within your church, one coming out of a merger. One of your other locations, it was almost like a launch from day one, right? Can you describe some of the different approaches to how churches launch campuses?
Yeah, there's 3 primary models that I see replicated over and over again. Now, there's different ways churches multi-site in structure, but as far as starting them, churches start through mergers, and there's all kinds of different mergers that actually happen as well that Jim actually gets into in that book, Better Together. And that was one of our campuses. That campus actually was a church that was in decline for 18 years.
37% of all multi-site campuses come through a merger.
How many was that, Jim?
37% of all multi-site campuses come through a merger, more than a third. So wow. It's a significant part of the component in multi-siting.
Yeah, and with 80% of churches today in America stuck or declining, there's going to be more of these mergers happening. And so churches that know how to skillfully navigate this conversation, and it takes a certain amount of science and art to pull this off well. I'm
getting requests every week for merger help.
Yeah,
either from the lead church or the joining church. But anyway,
yeah. And so that the church that became a part of Sun Valley and became our Tempe campus, they had been in decline for 18 years. We had a conversation. And ultimately they became Sun Valley Tempe. And today, almost 3 years later, they've more than doubled in size. They were right around 500 people. This past weekend, they had more than 1,200 people on campus. They've baptized more people in the last 2 years than they did in the previous 15. And so more people are meeting Jesus than have been before. And it's a beautiful work that started as an incredible dream. It was great gospel work. And that church has simply run through its life cycle. And this is a new birth for that campus and for the gospel to work there. Another campus was what we call a parachute drop. It was 45 minutes away. We had about 15 people driving 45 minutes up to come to our original broadcast campus. And they said, man, we'd like to have a Sun Valley church down here. And we're like, that's a great idea. There's this little barrier we had to get past called money. And we just weren't ready to send the amount of resources and people. We were able creatively to solve those hurdles, cross those bridges, and we've started them. And now they're consistently running over 300 people on their campus. And they're actually still in a setup teardown in an incredible venue. They're in the community center. It's a pitched floor, theater seating. It's gorgeous, and they're growing and doing it.
That's the harder way, Paul, to do multi-siting, what you did there.
Oh, yeah.
I call that a hybrid multi-site church plant. It's multi-site in the sense that it's one church centrally governed, it's centrally led, but it's more like a church plant in that it's more than 30 minutes away from the lead church. And we know that the vast majority of church attenders live within 30 minutes. And so when you get beyond 30 minutes, you're getting into what I call church planting territory, because you just don't have a strong base there. And that's what's made multi-site so successful, that you're not going to the next town. You're already there with a significant number of church attenders that love and know your church and have your DNA. When you go beyond 30 minutes, you get away from, it gets thinner there. But in spite of that, you guys made it work. And,
that's right.
And now, but that campus had to go and get some new people that you didn't have yet, which is not a bad thing at all.
No, that's absolutely right. And then this other campus that's beginning is actually what we call a hive. This is the language we've used. And so we've got, legitimately about 1,000 people that drive past the location where the site's going to be to get to our original broadcast campus. And so we've identified those people. I've identified the leaders and building the core team. We've got the campus pastor. We're ready to roll. And that one's going to launch here really soon as well. And so, 3 distinct different ways to get after it. None of them is necessarily wrong. I certainly believe this next one's going to be the easiest of the 4, just because culture's transferred through people, and our people are going to be there day one, and it's going to be Sun Valley the moment people walk on that campus.
That's super. So, Jim, you're working with all kinds of churches that are taking first step, second step, or more step into multi-site strategy. But talk to me about those instances where you talk a church out of multi-site. What are some reasons why you would try to convince them now is not the time?
It's a great question, Tony. I always say the first question to address going multi-site is the why question. Why are you doing this? And what initially started as a Band-Aid strategy for megachurches that found themselves out of room and out of space, that's what's compelled me down that path in the 90s in Colorado. And Willow and some of the other first wave of multi-site churches were mega churches that were trying to solve a space problem. But it very quickly evolved beyond a Band-Aid strategy to solve a space or zoning issue to a growth strategy for healthy churches of various sizes. But when I talk to churches about why are you doing this? Let me give you some reasons why not to do this. Don't do this because so many other churches are doing this. That's not a good reason. It's also another reason not to do multi-site is to fix or turn around a church that's stuck or in decline. I like to say, if you're not multi-siting is a healthy church strategy. If you're not healthy, multi-siting is all about reproducing who you are, and if you're not healthy, get healthy, then reproduce yourself. And so this is not a turnaround or a fix-it tool. And even churches that may not be in decline, but if this multi-siting will accelerate a growing church, it will accommodate a growing church, accelerate growth, but it's not a growth engine. If you're not an outreach-oriented church already, just going multi-site is not going to all of a sudden make you that way. I know when I went to Willow Creek, they hadn't grown in several years in the year 2000. It wasn't because they weren't outreach-oriented; they were maxed out with the roof, and they were willing to. So they were stuck. But not because they were unhealthy. It was more because of space issues. But a lot of churches are stuck and they're not growing because they don't have that outreach mindset. And so I suspect a lot of the churches I work with, there's not an invitational culture, that their church members love their church, but they would never invite someone to the church. If you don't have that kind of culture, it's really hard to grow a church. Increasingly in our post-Christian, post-church attendance value culture that we are in now. And so, but those are some of the reasons not to multi-site.
Yeah, that's good.
And as you and I have talked about, the average size of a church that goes multi-site is around 1,200 in attendance. That was our last survey, told us that. And so I like to say you need to be healthy enough where you can launch out a significant number of people, usually minimum 100 people, 150 people, and that be a strong enough congregation to be viable day one, and not devastate the sending campus. And so that's sort of a rule of thumb for me.
Yeah, that's good. All right, Paul, here's the deal. And Jim, we could go on hours digging into some nuances and the strategy behind multi-site, but we aren't afforded that opportunity today. But there's another next step that we can invite people to take. And Paul, I want you to talk about the brand new coaching network that you're starting for multi-site churches, or those investigating multi-site, coming this spring. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, Tony, thanks. I'm really excited about this opportunity. At the Unstuck group, we've been successfully coaching senior pastors and ministry leaders of churches all across America, literally for years now. And so now this opportunity that we have to coach multi-site leaders, leaders who are in churches that are thinking about going multi-site, or who are multi-site, trying to get past 3 campuses to that 4th campus. What we're doing is, over 6 months, we're going to take a Friday every single month, and from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, we're going to dig into the systems, structures, and pressures that we feel that are unique to multi-site church leaders. And you're going to get access to great leaders like Jim Tomberlin and others in the multi-site world to get new ideas and new strategies to get unstuck and move forward. And so, we're going to spend 6 months together digging into everything we need to dig into to help advance the gospel through a multi-site strategy.
That's great. So if you want to take advantage of that new coaching network, Paul will be facilitating. Jim is going to be with us for a couple of those sessions as well. You can go to the unstuckgroup.com, and there will be some options for you related to coaching and training, and we'd love for you to be a part of that. Jim, I'm continuing to hear great stories about what MultiSite Solutions is doing to help churches engage in multi-site and mergers. And again, I really do appreciate you being a part of the conversation here today as well.
But Tony, it's always a privilege to join with you guys. And just to reinforce what Paul and you're doing with these coaching network that you're developing, is that, there's not a one-size-fits-all of formula that all multi-site churches follow. Mm-hmm. That's why what you're offering, and that's why I love to participate with you, there's great value in a need for some individualized coaching around your unique set of circumstances and challenges that every church has. We know that all multi-site churches will wrestle with the same basic issues. I know what those issues are, but how they will address them and deal with those will vary from church to church. And so to get in a group, be with a group of half a dozen or so churches that are going through this process, and to have some experts come in like you're going to be bringing in to kind of help that process, is so invaluable. And I just love what you're doing. Honored to be invited to the table as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you, Tony.
Bye now.